Naomi, thank you so much for giving me your time today and having a chat about all things in the fourth wave. I know you're probably the most excited person like me in this space. So if you don't mind sharing, I really like to ask everyone how they first found EFT. I think everyone's stories are so unique, and I'm really keen for everyone to hear your story as well. But how did you find EFT? How did it come into your life?
Well, actually, the very first exposure to it was I had a birthday weekend with a lot of my friends there in Cambria in the United States on the coast. And I have this friend who's kind of like, she sort of calls me, or we exchange the King's Taster. So she'll try different things and say, no, you have to try this. You have to try this. You have to try this. And she tried to introduce me to tapping. And I remember we were standing out on the bluffs overlooking the ocean. And she said, there's this really cool thing. And it looked ridiculous because she didn't know what she's doing. So she didn't preface it with anything. And there was no science back then. So all she was doing was like tapping on her face. And I just thought, that looks like the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. This is not one of those things I'm going to be picking up and running with. So cut to, how many years later was it? Oh, probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years later, I had moved to Australia for a relationship. There's two reasons people move to Australia from North America.
What's that?
Work and relationship, okay? This was not work. I turned down $1 million a year. That was literally the offer on the table to be the showrunner on a show called Regenesis in Toronto, because I was moving to Australia for love, wasn't I?
You were.
And it took me 6 months because I had 2 dogs and they had to go through the whole rigmarole with that and the shots and the different things. And not to mention how expensive it was to do all of those things. And this was right around the time when the world was the 08 crash. Okay. So this was at the end of 07. And it feels like 5 minutes after my plane touched down in Sydney, the relationship ended.
Oh, wow.
And I was in absolute shock. I had never, first I was embarrassed. I just felt embarrassed. There'd been a big party for me in Los Angeles of like, off she goes. And I was in shock. It kind of had all the hallmarks of trauma, basically. Yeah. Isolated. I had to live in his house for 4 months while he started dating his ex-girlfriend again.
Oh, no.
Now, just because I want to give myself a little bit, I need to amp up my credibility here. We'd been in a relationship for about 1.5 years, and we'd been back and forth, and we had renovated his house together so I could move in. Like this was not Naomi moving to Australia on a whim.
No. So there was a lot of planning and kind of certainty in the relationship.
There was a lot of certainty, and he'd even offered to marry me if necessary so that I could work in Australia, but it wasn't necessary because I was able to get citizenship by descent because my mother was Australian. Okay. So anyway, went to see a doctor about the severe depression, and the doctor said, your depression is understandable in light of what's happened to you. By the time an SSRI actually kicks in or you find the right one, it's going to be 3 months down the line anyway. You'll be fine by then. Well, I wasn't fine by then. No. So 1.5 years later, I was still, and I learned about depression because I hadn't really known what depression was before then. I was really, truly angry to be alive every morning when I woke up. Mm-hmm. Never contemplated ending my life, but did wish for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was, and I'm not making light of that by any means. I'm just saying that when I explain my story to people, I want them to know how strongly I felt that I didn't want to be here as obviously the butt of the joke of the universe. Like I felt like there's some cosmic audience rolling around in the aisles. Like, look what we did to her. It was like the ultimate slip on a banana peel. And so I had been journaling. I've got so many journals because I was just filling the pages with just, how do I let him know what he did to me? Just the obsessive thinking, the physical pain in my body. Anyone who's ever been depressed will maybe identify with that. Was a surprising aspect of it. And I had really wonderful talk therapy in my late 20s with a woman named Dr. Aileen Lapierre, and she's the author of the book Healing Developmental Trauma. And I was really lucky to have her. She started out with body work and then progressed to, she was kind of going through her clinical practicum and so on, and said, we can't do the body work anymore because that's not like legit enough, because she had come from primal scream therapy originally and all this kind of stuff. And now she's moved into somatic work, so it's full circle. So I had kind of an experience with somatic work and experienced how powerfully just working on one area of the body can make memories pop up. So I'd had that experience. And also she gave me a toolbox. So as I'm journaling in my depression, I'm asking, what would Aileen ask me? Because she taught me the kinds of inquiry, the kinds of questions, the kinds of reframe, which sharpened my journal writing and helped me understand that I was dealing with grief and anger. Those were the two main emotions. And after about a year and a half of struggling and different things, I had tried mindfulness, meditation, all of the journaling, all of the things I could think of. Nothing was working for longer than like a day and a half. Mm. And I finally admitted to my three best friends in North America, one in LA, one in San Francisco, one in Toronto. We all got together on a Zoom, and they were trilling about all the things going on in their lives. And then, Naomi, it's your turn. And I just thought, can't lie. I don't want to be here. And they were like, yay, come back to North America. I said, no, I don't want to be on planet Earth. And they were like, if you've ever seen three people look like they want to jump through a computer, they all went into all hands on deck, all stations manned. One of them said, come back to the California. Yeah. That's obviously the solution. The other one said, get yourself on antidepressants. Yeah. And then the third one said, Laura, so the King's Taster that we exchange roles with, yeah. She said, you've got to do this tapping thing. And I thought that sounded the easiest. Now, I was willing to go on antidepressants. That would have been next. But I had known a lot of people on it that had had issues getting off it. And so it was kind of like one of those, if I really, really need to, but I'm going to try to find other ways first. Yeah. By the way, and also I had tried the lifestyle changes. I'd done all of the things that are recommended. And she sent me Gary Craig's original manual.
Oh, wow. We still have copies of that.
I will always.
Yes.
I will always, for legacy reasons. So she made me promise. And because I promised, I read it. It took 3 days because I had no energy, and I would read and then collapse into a heap and cry. And then the next day, I promised her, read, cry, read. And then it was like, well, I've finished reading it now. I guess I have to do it. So, well, I guess I'll try memorizing this thing called the full basic recipe. And it took me 10 minutes. It was a lot quicker than I thought. I thought it would take days. But as I'm doing it, I literally felt a change because all of the journaling and everything, and I had done it, kind of corralled everything into these emotions. And it taught me how to work on core beliefs and childhood experiences. So I was really effective at it. And also I wanted to mention the early work with Aileen, because that kind of was like, in a weird way, the part of working with a practitioner in helping you target what you tap on and just not randomly tapping. Yeah. So 2 hours a day, which I only did because it felt good, not because I was motivated, because when you're depressed, you don't have any motivation, not because I thought there would be any long-term effect, just because I found time in the morning, time in the evening, just to kind of make this pain go away for an hour. Yeah. And then it was to my great surprise that halfway through, like hour 13 or 14 or something, my depression fell off me like a slab of a mountain falling away. Wow. Have you had that experience where something just shifts in a quarter of a second?
Yeah, I've had that happen with sciatica pain.
Wow.
And I can still remember it to this day. I was, sitting in a chair, and it literally was a 15 out of 10 because the nerve had got trapped when I was pregnant with one of the babies, and it left. And I was like, where did it go?
It's disorienting.
Yeah. Wow. So you're about, 7 days into just doing 2 hours a day tapping?
Yep.
About a week.
I don't know if it was like 5 days, 6 days, 7 days. I know it was a week because that's what I kind of remember flagging. Wow, that took a week. And I had a trip to Los Angeles planned for 2 weeks hence that I had been dreading, because when you're depressed, happy things make it worse. And I had nothing I had tried had made me feel happy for longer than a day and a half. So as the trip approached, I started feeling like I'm not depressed. I felt like I was actually floating. I felt it's the analogy I give is when you're carrying something really heavy and you put it down, your arms kind of float up. My
Yeah.
whole being was floating up. I felt like I was walking on a cushion of air. I felt joyful. I felt light. I had none of the same. I was sleeping through the night. I wasn't having those the ruminations and those circular thoughts, and
Yeah.
the anger and the grief were gone. And I started to kind of think, well, maybe I'll enjoy myself on this trip, but I was kind of bracing myself for it to all come back. And halfway through the trip, it didn't come back. It hadn't come back, and it never has. And I was, I can actually enjoy this. So I was talking to a friend at lunch and telling her excitedly about this thing called EFT. And I said, I feel like it's dialed me back to the pre-moving to Australia me.
Yes.
And she said, I remember so clearly, we're sitting at the Crab Shack in Pasadena, and she shook her head and she goes, no, I've been watching you for the last hour. You're dialed back to the you when I first met you, before my disastrous marriage.
Oh, I've got like goosebumps all over my body right now.
Right? And
Wow.
I thought, oh my God, she's right. It's like I realized that I'd had a really difficult 10 years.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even, because you're just kind of keeping on. You don't even realize how it's piling up. And this big catastrophic life event kind of, it was the thing that got all the attention. But the reality is that there had been a big lead up, and in 7 days of tapping.
Wow.
And then I became just interested in tapping. It was just like, hey, something's wrong. Want to try this new thing? Yeah, I don't know how it works or why it works. No, it isn't woo, or it is woo, but who cares? It doesn't seem to matter if you believe in that or not.
Just give it a go. Oh my goodness. And so Laura, who was the person that obviously did the original kind of invitation, like what did she say? Or was she like,
Oh,
yeah, I knew that would help you?
absolutely. She did. And actually, Laura is, do you know the game Balderdash?
Yes.
She co-invented Balderdash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Laura's like big time.
Laura's big time. Laura is, she's a goer. She's an inventor. And likes to try lots and lots of different things. And then I ended up tapping with her lots of times. In fact, I tapped with her about, maybe it was about a year and a half ago. She fell off her bike, and I FaceTimed her, and the bruises, unbelievable. And she looked like she'd been in a fight. She had 2 black eyes because she had gone over the handlebars. And I said, can we tap, please? Because let's just tap right now. And so we tapped for maybe about an hour. And by the end, her bruises didn't look as bad. And I'm thinking that's my imagination, or the lights changed or something. But she no longer had the just shame because she wasn't wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of shame about that. And then the actual act of the experience of falling over the handlebars, the experience of hitting the sidewalk, all that stuff we tap on, all the different sort of experiential aspects of the body.
Yeah.
Were really important. And she texted me afterwards. She goes, I just walked downstairs to watch a movie with my family, and everybody gasped when I walked into the room because they didn't know I'd been tapping. They just didn't understand why my bruising was about 50% gone.
Wow. Wow. Well, we could just go a whole nother layer.
I know. I'm thinking.
We know. So if we fast forward however many years, you embrace tapping so much that you obviously trained in it, became a trainer yourself, full disclosure, do trainings for, our company, but obviously embraced it and did a whole life shift here and said, I want to help other people. I want to make that decision to kind of, obviously become so skilled in it that I can now change other people's lives. Like, how long was that process?
Well, it started immediately. I went to a meeting at the ABC for a series that I was pitching. And one of the executives there was talking about like neck hurting from coming back, long flight, whatever. And I tried to stay fixated on the pitch because all I wanted to do was tap with her. And I met up with her in the parking garage after. And I just saw her walking towards her car, and I said, hey. And she's a goer. She likes trying different things. I've later found out as I've gotten to know her. And I said, do you want to try this thing? And she was like, okay. And we kind of stepped off to beside the elevators and we did a little tap. And she was like, that's amazing. That's amazing. So when I went back, home and friends calling, hey, how'd the pitch go? I'm like, oh yeah, it was fine. I got to tap with the executive in the parking lot and she had like a sore neck. So that's the kind of thing I was doing, is naturally going into sharing it. I was tapping on everything that came up for me. I was like, will it work on this? Will it work on that? Will it work on this? So as that began to happen, I began to lose interest in writing for television.
Okay.
Which is a little bit tricky because I was on the board of the Writers Guild of Australia.
Wow.
And which is I had been invited onto the board. It was one of my best experiences in the industry, in the entertainment industry, and certainly in Australia. And I didn't feel congruent with it anymore because I felt like I want to do this tapping thing, and I'm turning down jobs, being like script producer and things like that, which I didn't understand. And I was in a state of total panic about what I was doing because I had a mortgage. So I'm like, what am I doing? So in a way, it wasn't a predetermined pathway. It's not like I decided. There was no pathway back then. There were a few sort of bright lights. I assumed they were making money at it, the tapping solution people and everybody sort of in the Tapping World Summit. But I was feeling myself drawn towards this just by that follow your bliss thing. What am I interested in doing? And I was dating somebody who found out that Jenny Johnson was coming for the first time, Sydney, going to do a training. And I think he was just trying to impress me by, look, I'm really actually getting into this thing that you love. And he goes, let's do this training. And I thought, that's 4 months away and we just started dating. That's kind of taking a big risk. But I thought, oh, what the heck? Let's just do it. Halfway through that training, I'm like, I'm going to be a practitioner. I'm going to do that whole accreditation certification thing. Oh my God. And then halfway, and when the second I was done with that, it was like, and now here's the expert level. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do that too. None of it was none of it was sort of premeditated at all. And then as soon as I finished that, I was invited, would you like to be a trainer? And that was for EFT Universe. Oh my God, I'm going to be a trainer. And at that point I thought, okay, this is a career. I better get serious about how to set this up as a career. And there were resources. The expert industry was starting to blossom online, and I took kind of the courses to support doing it as a career because I'd only done that other thing.
Yeah.
And so continued to and I'm still learning all the time from other people. And as new research comes out and new information and, even just like the trauma training was kind of considered this sort of bonus add-on thing that some people did, and now we understand that it's not optional anymore, being trauma informed as an EFT practitioner and so on. So I love how the field is constantly evolving.
Amazing. And given you have experienced talk-based therapy, and even with a somatic element, so obviously your therapist was embracing that even way back then, and now EFT. How do you see this, positioned in the fourth wave kind of, we're really talking about somatic body-based, EMDR included in that. How do you see this as different? You now work with clients, full practice, obviously the training is there as well, but working with people at that personal level, that individual level, how do you see this different to perhaps what you had experienced as, even developmental talk-based therapy, that kind of thing?
Well, I think that the simplest explanation is that they address and communicate with different parts of our brain. And talk therapy, the word cognitive is in one of the modalities, cognitive behavioral therapy, is very much kind of introducing you to reframes, introducing you to what's another way you could look at this, that kind of idea, which can be very valuable. Because just the same way someone who's a really good advice friend, can really kind of give you those aha moments that can shift your perspective, and that can be really valuable. What I find, though, is that doesn't touch the sides of the deep stuff in the body. And so the part of our brain, the limbic system, and then the amygdala, the reptile brain, the primitive part of the brain, even emotionally, when you have an understanding so it's the triune brain. You've got the prefrontal cortex, which is, I think, where the reframes land. Sometimes that impacts the emotional, but sometimes it doesn't. And it sort of never, I have to say, I don't think ever impacts at the deep sort of level of the reptile brain, the amygdala, fight or flight. I just don't think I say to people, never in the history of humankind has calm down worked. Saying to someone, calm down.
Calm down.
It doesn't work.
Particularly in the height of that
Exactly.
kind of level of distress, yeah.
Yes. So you could fake it, but you're not actually going to feel calm. And so I find that what EFT does is when people come to EFT with experience with talk therapy, it's on one hand, it's an advantage because the person is already interested in self-work. They haven't been pushed into EFT sessions by the partner that says, you need to fix yourself. It's somebody who's actually going, I'm on a self-work journey. I want to discover what makes me tick. And the disadvantage can be that they've got some preconceived ideas about what their issues are. It doesn't take very long, though, to just kind of say, okay, with this particular way of working, I want you to listen to what your body says, listen to those spontaneous kind of thoughts and ideas and fragments of memory that may pop up. So basically the difference is, I think they can all work together. And I think that there's a place for all of them, depending on what the different things that you're working on are and at what level the triggers happen, the events that happened earlier in life. And I think that when I was working with Aileen, I just remember once she was doing deep tissue massage as part of the body work. And she had her thumbs almost inside my foot. Wow. And she had just told me, while I do this, I just want you to tell me whatever pops up for you. And I suddenly had the image of the door of our family car. And I told her. And she said, okay, tell me more about that. What else are you seeing? And I said, well, I'm realizing I'm kind of, it's not kind of down below. It's not down low. It's kind of up high. And I said, so I must be small. Yeah. And she said, okay, tell me more. So she's still working on my foot. And suddenly this is what happens in tapping, right? So suddenly this whole memory of when I was 4 years old, jumping out of the car on a hot summer day. I was sitting on my mother's lap because, back in the day.
No seatbelts.
They had never been actually closed in their entire life. They were like underneath the car, probably underneath the seats. I had been sitting on her lap and I jumped out of the car and my bare feet landed right in something the neighbor's dog had done. Oh. And my mother ran upstairs screaming, don't come up the stairs, don't come up the stairs. So I'm running down the alleyway full of gravel, trying to drag my feet to kind of clean. That was traumatic for my little 4-year-old self. Mm. And that memory was stored in my foot. And I had not thought of that since the minute it happened. Wow. So that was kind of the beginning and a few of those different experiences. Then she said to me at one point, after she'd been working, I worked with her for 2 years, once a month for 2 years, or once a week, for 2 years. And I remember her saying to me at one point, I think you have a lot of anger at your mother. Now that's something talk therapy does. EFT would never do that. We wait for the client to kind of volunteer that information, but she was right. And so it really helped me to kind of realize I'd never thought of myself as having any anger at all, but which is a little problem when you realize you've probably experienced anger twice in your whole entire life. You might want to look at that. And so she helped me do that and explore in terms of the family dynamic and what was your dad like and siblings and your place in the family and those kinds of things. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And it explains to anyone listening in that perhaps even has just gone for a routine massage, even a relaxation massage. And whilst you may have been lying there, perhaps thought of something that you might have thought was random at the time. Yet we do have this body of research and science now that explains why certain memories might be stored not in the brain level, but throughout the body. And that's kind of, a whole separate sort of conversation. But it does explain why people might kind of go, oh, when I had that massage or someone touched me there on the shoulder, I suddenly thought of that. And yeah, absolutely perfect explanation as to why that happens. So now working with clients with this particular modality, what kind of outcomes do clients report? So your story, is that typical? Is that what people experience when they go through, a session, whether it's for depression or anything else? Is that typical what you went through? Is that how clients feel as well?
Nothing is typical. That's kind of one of the things that I've discovered. It really depends on everyone's individual journey. But that experience of having something shift suddenly is quite common, I will say. It's quite common.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had this happen a number of times with clients where either we're working on that final piece of something, or it's cumulative. And suddenly we've worked on enough where they describe the same thing. And because I give homework when appropriate for clients and tapping homework, and half of them do it and half say, I'd rather just pay you to hold my hand, which is totally fine. I'm no judgment. But in cases where that massive shift happens when I'm not present, it's like in the next session, or I get an email saying, oh my God, this just happened to me, which is very similar, where they're just tapping, doing their homework, and then suddenly a state change that happens in a fraction of a second. And everybody expresses it sort of the same way. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed is that, and I tell my clients this, healing is not a straight line. You don't heal on a graph, this straight line where you kind of improve on a steady. It tends to go, and for anybody, I don't know how to describe this for people listening and not looking at the video, but it kind of, you go improve and then you tick down a little bit, and then you keep improving and then you tick down a little bit and keep improving. And I find it's that way in so many other ways in life, that they're almost kind of like, it's like a little reset, a little setback / reset, and then forward. And what's happening maybe in tapping is that you something comes up, you clear it, you feel better, and then another layer. And so it's experienced as, oh, I've gone backwards, when really you haven't. You've just tapped into another layer that's ready to come up. And you think about all the things that humans do. I talk about it as like contractions. And it's how we release everything. And so it can be that, but it can also be where the client, when I start working with clients, we talk about the apex effect, which is where you kind of don't give tapping the credit for how better you feel. And boy, I'm sure you've got some stories too.
Yes, decades.
I mean, where people just, oh, I'm pretty sure it wasn't the tapping. And you're like, deep breaths.
You weren't doing anything else.
Oh yeah, I know. And it's just, why is there this push to discount the tapping? But when I work with clients I used to do this program. I don't have time for it right now, but it was really satisfying. Any practitioners listening to this, please offer this for your clients. It was a transform program. It was twice a week for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So they commit to that. And the first thing I would do is give them a kind of a quality of life questionnaire, and tell them to record themselves, video themselves on their computer, their phone, or whatever, answering those questions, and then put that away and don't look at it for 3 months. And then at the end of the work, I'm going to give you the same questionnaire. You're going to record yourself again, and now you'll be able to look at the old video and the new video side by side, and people's socks are knocked off.
That's fantastic. It's almost journaling and looking back at your journals, but super kind of sized so that you can actually see the video and your expressions, your demeanor. Wow. Oh, wow. I hope people listening go and do that.
Because I can see it as the practitioner. It's like light comes into their face. Everything kind of lifts. Their posture changes. Their perspective is different. But the way I think of it is, because what you're doing is actually becoming more you, it doesn't feel strange enough for you to go, oh, this must be the tapping. Because you're actually returning to kind of your default setting of how you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so I thought, by doing this video, and it must have been divine inspiration, because I don't know why I thought of doing that. I didn't get the idea from anybody. I just knew from working with clients that I want them to see the change I see side by side. And the emails that I would get, or when I would see the person next, it would be, they always say the same thing. One of them is, I had no idea how much I had changed. Number 2, I feel so sorry for him or her.
That's that sense of compassion, self-compassion, isn't it? That just
Yeah.
naturally kind of emerges. And even in facial expressions, stress, and if we just talk about stress, meaning, lots of things here, pain as well as distress and trauma, shows in the face. So the research has caught up, thank goodness, to what practitioners knew decades ago, that, cortisol is highly affected, reduced by tapping. And that will show in the face. That will show as that relaxed demeanor and, sense of calmness.
Yeah, and the reframes and the perspective shifts. And not to mention, an important element, which is that, well, I had one client once, one of the things she wanted to work on was she thought she was drinking way too much.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was doing a bottle of wine a night or something like that. And she was doing this Transform program. And I remember that after, I think it was probably session number 18 or something like that, she said, "Hey, I just realized yesterday that I haven't had a drink in 3 weeks or even thought about it."
And she'd kind of forgotten that aspect.
She had literally forgotten. And she said, "And we haven't even tapped on my drinking." And I said, "That's all we've been tapping on. We were working on childhood abuse."
Right. Yeah.
And so when people come to work with an addiction, for example, or any kind of, we'll call it an excessive behavior, and some excessive behaviors are more damaging to our lives than others. Collecting figurines probably isn't going to, impact your life as much as a gambling addiction, for example, but it comes from the same place. It's an urge to self-soothe.
Yeah.
And with EFT, we work on what are you self-soothing?
Yeah. Amazing. I want to circle back just to something you mentioned in your story, but ask you if this is necessary for anyone listening in that sort of says, look, I want to embrace this. I want to give this a go. You talked about that you were tapping purely because time that you had available and perhaps, you didn't have much energy to do anything else. An hour in the morning, an hour at night. So 2 hours a day. That's a fair amount of tapping. And then obviously after what is quite a short period of time, a week, you felt that enormous shift in quite a heavy level of symptomology, depression or even diagnosis. Is it necessary to tap that much on your own to get a shift? What do you find is a sweet spot with clients? Is it okay to just work with a practitioner in session and not do your own work outside? But if someone's listening and saying, well, how much do I need to tap to get a shift? What is important in this space?
Yeah, really good question, because I get asked a lot, how much tapping is it going to take? And it's how long is a piece of string, which is a horrible way to answer a question, but it's true because it really depends on what you're working on. Are you working on, a really kind of, maybe you're angry about something that was said, that's really sort of situational. I'm angry about for example, I had a client who was angry about the way she was let go from a job.
Mm-hmm.
And really all of her issues were about the anger about the way she was let go of the job. And I have this scale I always call, what is the reason for the reaction? If the reason equals the reaction, work on what that reason is. And the way she'd been let go of the job, in the circumstances, was something that was justifiable, that she would have this anger for, a couple of years later. So it didn't take very long, I think 2 hours of tapping to work on that particular thing. But what we often find is that if the reason is not up to the level of the reaction, that means we got to go back further for a reason.
Yeah.
And so you might have to go back to anger about something that happened, a rejection that happened in high school. And then that goes even back further to an early childhood experience. And so the more sort of places that you have to go and the more complex the particular problem is, you can think of it as how deep do the roots go, the more time it can take, just because it takes time to address all of the different events and their aspects. But I like to remind people that with EFT, you're able to make permanent changes, shift your state fundamentally in some cases on things that there is no other modality that could help you. You might be talking about it in therapy, no matter how good the therapist is, for 20 years and still kind of not move the needle. You've just learned to manage your symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah.
but you've still got that deep triggering. That's still kind of the way that you're built. So I had one client that had a lot of trauma in her childhood, and we were doing 2 1.5-hour sessions a week for a year. And that seems like a lot if you think EFT is a 1-minute wonder. But with a client like this that had multiple kind of addictions and as a result of all the traumas and anxieties and core beliefs and things like that, and lots of adult experiences that had happened as a result of what had happened as a child, there was a lot to work through, but the improvement kept happening. And finally, she was kind of ready to stop after a year, made all these positive changes, all these measurable changes, and felt like ready to kind of just live life. And then she's come back periodically for just those little one-off sessions when something flares up, but she also knows how to tap on her own. So that's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum. And in terms of self-tapping, I do think it's really important. I tell people it's like I'm a dentist where I can take care of a cavity, but you need to have a toothbrush and a toothpaste to take home, you know? And if it seems like a lot of time that I was spending that twice a day for an hour, it wasn't a full hour. It might have been 45 minutes in the morning and then an hour and 15 in the evening. If that seems like a long time, it's important to remember that I had physical pain in my body. The way I described it, I felt like I had a cloud of rotating barbed wire around my heart.
Oh, wow. Any practitioner these days hearing that would just
jumping on it.
Yep.
Jump in. It's too bad it's legacy. It's been gone for 15, 17 years, something like that. So, but it was like that, and the tapping as I tapped made that go away, and then it would come back in between. But there was a thing that I was doing also that was in that original manual. You remember remainder tapping, where you're out in the world and you get triggered, and that would happen to me. And I would just pick a tapping point, and I always liked my collarbone point. And you would just say this remaining anger, this remaining anger, this remaining anger. And in the amount of time, literally that took me to say that, my thoughts would shift from the angry thought to, should I go pick up my dry cleaning after I go to the grocery store or before? Like literally, it would derail that thought. And so I was just doing that level of self-tapping as well. And I just tell people, the more self-tapping you can do on your own, if that 2 hours a day seems like a lot, think of how much time you spend doing other self-soothing things. Ask your phone how much time you spend looking at social media and YouTube videos.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you want to focus on working something that you're actively trying to take care of, then it's worth spending the time. But, doing it the right way is going to give you a more effective result. And there's so many resources out there, from getting trained to reading books about it, your books. Someday I'll finish my
It was on my question list. Stay tuned, everyone. There is a book coming from Naomi.
3 of them.
2 or 3 books, and I've seen the titles, so don't worry. We'll stay on Naomi to
They're
get
half finished. Actually, the book, the very first one, which I started years ago, was it will be called Tapping Out of Depression, even when you barely care enough to try.
Yeah. And
what happened was, when I was starting to write that book, the general belief was that depression cannot be helped with EFT. And my book was partly, I beg to differ, but I wanted to give people, and what the book will be, is a roadmap showing this is exactly what I did. If you follow these steps yourself, you might be one of the people that can clear your depression the way I cleared mine with this particular way. And then all of the research started coming out, starting to talk about how EFT can be effective for depression. And so I put a pause on the book because I wanted to let the research kind of catch up. I thought, now we have to be responsible about how we talk about EFT. And what I'm doing now, as I'm getting back into it to finish it, is realizing I have to revise a lot of it, because when I started it, there wasn't all the research. I'm not going to try to talk about all the research, but I definitely want to point to the sources where people can get that information. And I want to make sure that, I'm an evidence-based EFT practitioner, and I now understand so much about what's going on in the body when we do tapping. And so my references are going to change in the way that I write about that.
Perfect timing for the book. Research is finally catching up to everyone's experiences, but I think we can't wait to see that, because I do think the lived experience offers another layer, doesn't it? And speaks to someone out there who can relate, and people want to share in that. And obviously the gift of tapping in this fourth wave might actually be part of someone's healing journey as well. Naomi, there's so many more things I want to ask you, but I'm going to have to put pause on it and come back to it another time, because I think we could talk about so many things. This has been just absolutely a gift, listening to your story, and in this way, just about what you went through, but how it literally not only changed your life, but changed your journey as to what you now offer other people. All of Naomi's details are below, including the book that you mentioned from your original therapist. We want to thank Laura, who's out there, and we hope that she hears this one day, because she was the one who, we always have that person. I have my Alan, who offered me EFT, and you have Laura, and we want to acknowledge them as well, because otherwise who knows whether these tools may have come across our path. So
Meant
thank
to
you
be.
so much for your offering today, and your story as well. And of course, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, all of your details are below as well. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Naomi.
for having me.